Hey everybody, welcome to 30 Ways to Happy Days. I'm Alana Yvonne with Truly Great Life, and we are on way number 21. Way number 21 is prudence. Character strength of prudence. What comes up when you hear the word prudence? Probably prude. Probably something, maybe something negative, like who wants to be a prude? But it's actually maybe helpful to think about it as cautious wisdom or cautiously wise. So how in the world does this, connect with having a happier day or thriving or flourishing or having more well-being? Well, when you think about it, when we act, depending on the situation, with cautious wisdom, maybe we save ourselves from a really bad outcome. Maybe we are exercising a self-control muscle, which we did talk about in an earlier recording, that gets us closer to a goal that we're trying to go for, right? So this prudent strength, which again, if you have not seen or listened to ways number 1 and 2, I highly recommend you go back and listen to them because they are foundational to the rest of the 30 ways. And it's just a muscle that we have, but maybe you're not using. So let's go into the definition, right? What in the world is prudence? So to explain prudence maybe to yourself or someone else or your child or a student or whatever, whoever you have in your life that, because it's when we try to teach things that we really know how much we understand or don't understand. It's one of the best ways to learn is to try and share it with someone else, right? Which is, in a way, what I'm trying to do here as well. So the great thing is that you get to decide how much this resonates with you, how much it makes sense to you, what you want to do about it, and then if you like what you're hearing or if it makes sense to you, try to bring it into your own life, but also try to bring it, maybe introduce someone else to it. If you have that within, your sphere of influence, if you will, or someone that you're related to or involved with or responsible for, because all of these 30 ways that I'm sharing here, they're coming from very strong roots, very deep, evidence-based, if you will, ways of thinking and living in terms of what makes for the good life. So this is all coming through the lens of positive psychology, but the way positive psychology researchers came up with this was going back thousands of years through religion and moral code and philosophy and just researching what are those ingredients for the good life and how can we teach them, how can people learn about them and incorporate them. So that's what positive psychology is kind of, based on, is how can we help people? How can people deliberately learn and try different ways and understand what will help them experience more flourishing, more well-being, okay? So prudence, if you think in your own life or in someone's life that where maybe they took a risk, I'm thinking specifically of like a physical risk, but maybe they took a risk or any kind of risk that unfortunately for whatever reason did not come out as anticipated or did not go the way they were hoping for, right? So, risk is part of life. That's part of what we're doing here, is to take those chances and to take the risks. Prudence is one of those strengths that we get to bring in when we're weighing pros and cons, right? When we're weighing pros and cons, when we're taking a look at cost benefit. So if we're not used to exercising that muscle of cautious wisdom for whatever reason, a lot of times maybe ego comes into it, right? You don't want to be seen as someone who's scared. If you mix this up with fear, right? Cautious wisdom doesn't necessarily mean someone's afraid. If you're overusing it too much, maybe there's, some fear there. But cautious wisdom, being prudent, is a very nuanced, kind of balanced muscle that kind of puts the brakes on things before maybe we get in over our heads, so to speak. Okay, so going back to the definition, okay, or the way we can explain it. You are careful about your choices. You're careful. And what does careful mean? Well, let's break down that word for a minute. Like, you're full of care. Like, there's an intention there maybe, right? There's an awareness, there's a mindfulness, it's not so reactive, right? And there's a place for that let's put intuition aside, I'm not going to go there, but like there's a place for that kind of gut response, right? But how much of it maybe is tied to bravado or something else. So again, it's being careful. Now, we don't want to live so constrained that we're careful with everything and become neurotic about it, right? But there's choices that have some thought behind it, and this ties into decision making, right? So related, you could say cautious, right? Caution, warning, right? So how well does your prudence muscle flash at you if you're about to do something that might be a risk, that might be a greater risk than you anticipate? Okay, so some of us are very good at using that prudence muscle, right? Exercising that prudence strength. Where in your life are you maybe underusing it, and where are you maybe overusing it? Just something to think about. Prudence or cautious wisdom is where you're not taking undue risks. Okay, so what does undue risks mean? Like, you're not taking unnecessary risks. Again, this is where, think about, like, what are you working on? What problem are you trying to solve here? What is this, in the best case scenario, what would that outcome be? And is it worth the risk? And if you're like, no, it's just, I'm showing off, or it's my ego, or I don't want to lose face. All right, but, in your own thought process, when you're evaluating whether or not this is a risk you want to take or something you want to do, a choice you want to make, you can remember in your pocket you've got this tool, this character strength called prudence, this cautious wisdom. You could maybe look at it as, the angel and the devil on the shoulder, right? I'm sorry, I'm holding my hair clip here. The angel and devil on the shoulder. So you could say that, the angel is there to kind of keep you from making those mistakes. So if you don't like the word prudence, if you don't like cautious wisdom, you can look at this strength as like my guardian angel is there to keep me from making a mistake or keep me from making the same mistake. And so how can I listen to it? You make your choices based on you're weighing all of those variables, right? But like, if you want, you can think of this in a more playful way or a more spiritual way. We talked about spirituality before, and like, you've got this guardian angel, or you've got this, in Judaism, there's the idea of the Yetzer HaTov, which is the good inclination, right? So you could also look at this as kind of that part of you that wants to do the right thing or make the right decision. So you can bring that into this idea of prudence as well, okay? And whatever faith you come from, or whatever background you come from, or spiritual practice or lack thereof, and just, your frame of looking at the world, like, what is that element that's looking out for your best interest, right? Within yourself. And how can you tap into that when you're going to evaluate a risk or a decision or a choice that you have to make? Because again, all of these ways to happy days, they're elements that can help us live our best lives. Not in the sense of like we determine all the outcomes, right? But in terms of the decisions we make, the choices we make, moving forward through our day. Who do we want to be? How do we want to be? So prudence, it comes into play. This cautious wisdom, it comes into play. Another way to think of it is people who are really good at exercising their prudence muscle, right? They don't say or do things that they're going to regret later. Are you one of those people who's like quick to fly off the handle? Are you someone who like, what's the phrase? You stick your foot in your mouth all the time, like you say something and then you're like, oh, I wish I could take that back. Okay? So it's I think encouraging, right, to remember or to learn, if this is new for you, like you have the ability to hold back. This is where we use prudence. This is where we use self-control, which we've talked about. This is where we can maybe use spirituality. This is a self-kindness. Bring forgiveness into it too. All right, we're on way 21 now. We have a lot of different ingredients to play with here as you go through your day, depending on what the day throws at you. All right, not saying or doing things that might later be regretted. And what do we do if we do or say something that we might later regret? Hopefully the discretion is not, beyond the pale, and it's within the range of you're able to ask for forgiveness or make amends or whatever it is. Okay, just remember you have this strength. So this is like practical reason or wisdom, right? Common sense, which we say is not so common. All right, so one thing that's important to also know from the research about prudence, cautious wisdom, being careful about what you say and do, this is one of the least endorsed character strengths around the entire world. What does that mean? Is that it's really one of the lower strengths. We talked about self-control, self-regulation earlier, which is also like at the bottom. So self-control, do we have a theme here? Self-control is towards the bottom and prudence or cautious wisdom is at the bottom. So if you struggle with those things, right, you're in good company, but that doesn't necessarily give us an excuse to not use that muscle maybe a little bit more than we have, just because we know really a lot, everyone is struggling with this. Most people make decisions or say things that they later regret at some point in their life. And it takes a lot of discipline and mindfulness and a practice to inch your way towards changing that, so that you have fewer times, incidents, events, occurrences, words, letters written, whatever it is that you regret. Like, there's that message of like, we want to live a life that we don't regret. I shared in the previous recording, the saying, is it the previous or the one before? A life lived in fear is a life half lived. But that doesn't mean you necessarily go all the way 180 degrees to like throwing all caution to the wind. There's a balance, right? There is a balance. It's like Goldilocks, right? Just right. Not too cold, not too hot, but just right. And that's true for all of these ways. You don't want to go to extremes. First of all, when we go to extremes, is it even sustainable? But also it's not the right way, per the research, to use the strength in order to increase your likelihood of having a happy day, right? In order to increase the likelihood of having and being the kind of person you want to be. It's balance. It's that middle ground. So with this one, with prudence, with cautious wisdom, with careful wisdom, you want to not be throwing caution to the wind, and you don't want to be like overly cautious that you're like chained and not doing anything because you're so afraid of making a mistake. So finding that balance. Okay. Now, within like the classroom, prudence is it's interesting because for teachers out there or parents out there with kids still in school or whatever, it's associated with like positive classroom behavior, right? This cautious wisdom, this being careful about what you say and do. Sure, because then it's less disruptive in the classroom, right? But going back to the earlier, research that I shared just now, which is that it's one of the least used character strengths, okay, globally. Do you see why there's issues with class disruption? Maybe. Especially when we're talking about kids and like, again, their prefrontal cortex is not going to be fully developed until they're in their early 20s. So we've got a lot of, just growing to do. So can we bring kind of a generous assumption to the classroom and in our families? Can we bring that kind of forgiveness and generous assumption and benefit of the doubt in our families as well? Where like, and some adults also like have this, right? So kids are not necessarily being prudent. Teenagers, yay, teenagers. I've got a couple of them. Okay, so cautious wisdom, not something we can necessarily expect from our younger people. It doesn't mean they're not capable, obviously, but in terms of the wiring and the brain development, it's just going to be harder, okay? Now, some people, this is a top character strength. For some people, they're naturally wired that way. But what the research has shown is that most of us are not wired to have prudence. This is not one of the more common character strengths. So don't beat yourself up if you are struggling with things that maybe you say things or do things that you later regret. The question is, what are you going to do moving forward, okay? it's like once you know, you can't plead ignorance, right? Because we do have this character strength, even if it's not something that's easy to use. Find something in your life that you would like to change a little bit, right? Maybe it's a habit. Maybe, one of the things, it's not only like it's saying things we regret, right? So there are many, many tricks to how do I like bite my tongue or wait, count to 10 before I say something. What is it? Like if you make a speech when you're angry, it'll be the best speech you will ever regret. You'll make the best speech you'll ever regret. Something like that. I mean, so anytime you get ticked off or anytime you get triggered or anytime you get frustrated, can you pause and take a breath? And that would be, I would say, exercising your muscle of prudence. So yay you. Can you just pause, right? It's minding that gap. Okay? I mentioned Viktor Frankl before with logotherapy, and that's, between stimulus and response, there's a space, right? So whatever that stimulus is, whatever that is that's getting you into, I almost said into heat, but like getting you like riled up, fired up, okay? Pause. Not easy, but can be learned, okay? And that would be using your prudence, your character strength of prudence, okay? And then this other research nugget I'll just share is that for those who do have a higher use of prudence, it's related to a lot less aggression. That makes sense? If someone has, and this is also related, I would think, to self-control, self-regulation, but prudence is cautious wisdom. So again, this is thinking before you act, thinking before you speak. Do we see examples out and about in the world today on a public media level of prudence? Depends what you're looking for, right? Or what you're looking at. If you want to find examples to inspire you of cautious wisdom in action, you have to be deliberate in looking for it. You have to be deliberate in seeking it. Because it's not obvious that people are using this character strength. First of all, because it's not used as easily, but also because, let's just say it doesn't necessarily make the headlines. So if you want to be inspired by what's going on out there and other people for any of these character strengths, you're going to have to specifically look for it. And look for it within yourself. What is one example of you using prudence in a decision to either do something or to say something? And if you need a reminder when you make a bad decision that you actually have that, think of that, let's say one time. If you can think of 2 times, great, in the past week, in the past month, in the past year. If you have to go back a couple years, go back a couple years. But write it down, make it external, because when we're in our head, we don't remember everything we actually know. We don't necessarily remember what we've accomplished. Sometimes we need other people to remind us. Sometimes we can remind ourselves with I like to write. I'm even holding this pen right now. But, sticky notes, stick them where you'll remember it. A lot of people getting tattoos. I don't know, maybe there's like a phrase or something that's symbolic for you. If you get tattoos, you could tattoo it, and then you have like a permanent reminder, or get a temporary tattoo. Okay? But it's this is your life. It's not anybody else's life. And at least in this trip, we get one shot at it. So prudence doesn't need to be like a dirty word, right? Being a prude doesn't need to be, there's a whole connotation there, but if you make decisions for yourself to be able to go to bed at night, then that is what you want to be able to do. So I'm going to leave it at that for prudence. And go out there and find things that support you in this, and I will see you on the next way. Thanks for joining.